Everybody, thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here tonight. I wish I could be with you guys in person. Things just didn't work out this month, but I've been hearing all about your organization in Utah from Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll, who has been a good friend for a very long time, and through Martin. So thank you again for having me, and let's get started. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, my name is Stephanie Arnold. I am currently living in Florida. I was living in Chicago, but before that, I was living in LA. I used to be a TV producer, and I used to produce a lot of reality shows that you're probably sick of watching or offended for watching in your past or your family. But the one thing I was wishing for my whole life was to have someone to share my life with. I had this great career, but I didn't have that person. And I met my husband through a matchmaker, a reality TV show matchmaker, yes. And I met him when I was in LA, and he lived in Chicago. We met, got married, and he relocated me to Chicago. And that was pretty much the end of my career. But the one thing I did want to produce at that moment was a family. And so we started our life in Chicago. I had a beautiful stepdaughter that came as a package deal. And the first child I had was a daughter, and she was born in 2010 with no complications other than the fact that I did need IVF. But went 41 weeks, gave birth, no issue, and was off to the races for our second child. Now, the second child took about round 7 of IVF, and my husband got a job in New York as the chief economist for the New York Attorney General's office. So he was going back and forth between New York and Chicago. He still taught at the University of Chicago in economics. And so I got pregnant with Jacob, our second child, about like 2 months after he had to move to New York. And so everything went perfectly, wonderfully. And about the 20-week ultrasound, which I'm sure the men in the room don't need to hear all of the details, but for the women who have had children, who have grandchildren, great grandchildren, at the 20-week ultrasound, that is when you see all the important issues with the baby, the 4 quadrants of the heart, the spine, everything. And we were splitting our time between New York and Chicago. So when I went to New York, I went to the radiologist there, got my ultrasound, and the radiologist said, "Oh, you have a placenta previa." And in that moment, I sat back and I said, "I don't know what this is," to my husband, "but I've got a bad feeling." And he's like, "What are you talking about? You've got great prenatal care. You're at NYU and you're also at Northwestern and in Chicago. We're really informed about everything." I said, I don't know, but I have a bad feeling, and I am a very rare blood type, being O negative. I don't want to be special in any category." But it was, if you can understand this, it was a knowing. You don't know how you know, you just do. And it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And I got home that moment and I started looking up what a placenta previa was. So a placenta previa is when the placenta is growing on top of the cervix. If that happens, usually what happens is as the uterus grows, as the baby grows, it'll move out of its way. And then usually it's a 1 in 200 risk. It's pretty common. The worst thing that could happen is you could bleed a little bit, and then that's it. But then I kept reading, and a placenta previa can turn into an accreta, which is where the placenta marries itself to the uterus. If that happens, you could bleed, but if it embeds deeply, then you could hemorrhage, and you and the baby could lose your lives. And in that moment, when I read those words, I told my husband, "This is going to happen to us." Saw it clear as day. I said, like, what are you talking about? I said, this is going to happen to us. The only difference is the baby's going to survive, but I will be dead on the operating table. And he's like, he's a statistician by trade. So he's like, honey, what you're afraid of is a half a percent chance of happening, And I said, I understand that, but this is going to happen. So I didn't stop there. So at some point I went to every prenatal care, every person, every doctor, every nurse. And I said, my placenta previa is going to turn into an accreta. I'm O negative. So you're going to need a lot of blood. I'm going to hemorrhage. I read that, the one way to prevent this is to have a hysterectomy. So I'm going to need a hysterectomy. I'm going to be cut from sternum to pelvis. The baby's going to be fine. And I'll be dead on the operating table. And I said it exactly like that. Every time I went in to see another clinician, and every clinician rolled their eyes at me and said, Mrs. Arnold, I think you are stressed. I think you need some sleep. You're hormonal, you're pregnant. And again, it was very difficult because I wasn't being heard. Now imagine at 5 months pregnant, you still have a few more months to go. And every single day you are waking up, you are walking, you are thinking about this. At one point, I was taking my daughter, who was 2.5 at the time, in New York, and I was walking around the stroller, and there was a fountain in the middle of Tribeca Park, and it was winter. And in my mind's eye, I was explaining to her how the fountain is so beautiful when it's flowing. But all of a sudden, I had a visceral reaction to it, and I saw it as blood was gushing out of the fountain. And immediately I started to hemorrhage. And I was wearing black leggings, and, it's New York. It's, I'm wrapped up. And I almost fainted. I grabbed a hold of the stroller and I called my husband and I said, meet me at the ER. I'm hemorrhaging. So we go to the ER. I get triaged. And the doctor is like, Mrs. Arnold, are you okay? I said, no, obviously I'm not. I'm hemorrhaging. And he's like, no, you're not. Everything's fine. Baby's fine. Amniotic fluid's fine. And my husband says, this is, okay, so this was a false alarm. And with every part of my being, I said, oh no, this is a warning. So I tried my best, met with doctors, continued. I said, what happens? We had a friend of a friend who was a fellow gynecological oncologist. And I said to him, I said, what happens in the event that you need a hysterectomy when you're giving birth? He said, Stephanie, you're not going to need that. And I said, well, just humor me. And I said, so he says, well, if that happens, your OB will not do the surgery. They will transfer you to maternal fetal medicine, but you actually want a gynec to do the procedure because they have more experience with high risk reproductive organ surgery. And so I set on a path to meet with the head of gynec at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago. And I finally get an appointment with him. We're in the waiting room. My husband went with me to every single appointment. I think he was doing the best he could with the tools in his toolbox, because my husband was an Air Force pilot. So for him, it's like all the data leading up to this does not make sense. All of the tests are negative. Everything is negative for what you think is going to happen. But, he humored me. I went into the waiting room, and you see these poor women who are suffering from reproductive organ cancer. They have no hair on their heads. They have IVs in their arm. They're sitting in the waiting room. And here I am, a healthy 7-month pregnant woman. And my husband says, I'm embarrassed to be here. And I said, I don't know what to tell you. Everybody is telling me they see an open road, and all I see is this 18-wheeler headed straight for me, and nobody can see it. I said, maybe this doctor has had a cancer patient who has had some sort of premonitions, visions. Maybe they had this foreboding and this means something else. And because I'm going to some other doctor who has some other specialty, maybe they'll come up with something. And so I go in, I meet with the doctor. I'm sitting there with the resident, and she's taking notes. And how can we help you, Mrs. Arnold? And I said the exact same thing. I said, my placenta previa is going to turn to accreta. I need you to do the surgery. My husband likes to say that it was like very mafia-like. I see you, you see me, you're my doctor now. And so, and I finished with my whole conversation and he looks at me and he's like, Mrs. Arnold, uh, have you been on the internet? Why, yes, I have, doctor. I said, but however, this is going to happen. So he says, okay. Why don't we do an MRI? And if the MRI is positive for an accreta, then the day you go in to have your C-section, because I had to have a mandatory C-section because of the previa, then I will schedule myself and do the hysterectomy then. And I felt better because now I had something to do that was a little bit more invasive, but not going to hurt the baby. And maybe it would give me some sort of revelation of what was going on in my body. So do the MRI. The MRI is negative for an accreta. My husband's like, you should feel better. And I said, I feel worse because I'm running out of people to tell this crazy foreboding story to. Now, just to make it clear, I am not a histrionic, neurotic person. I have had a career that was very high pressured. We did a lot of live television. This was not typical behavior of me. So my husband probably thought, well, he did think when he told me later that he thought something was wrong with the baby because I was going off the deep end, and he didn't want to articulate that, even though he says, and if any of you have seen the Netflix show with us on it, he's very, very logical. I am logical too, by the way. I'm just more spiritual. But he, will come across less emotional. And so for him, he was like, I just didn't want to articulate that there was something wrong. So I'm like, well, did that mean that you were a little bit more spiritual, thinking that you were going to put something out into the universe? And maybe that was going to give some bad energy. He avoids that question. So we go, I have all of, I'm getting ignored by everybody. So I just want to show you like how much I did. And then I'm going to switch over just to open this. Let me, because you kind of have to see it to really believe what the heck I did. All right. So, let me not. All right. Share. Hold on 1 second. Shift. That's not working. So let me try that again one more time. Okay. So, this is us. I'm moving past this. Husband, the second child is Adina. The first one on the bottom is my stepdaughter. Career that I had. Okay. So I went after the gynonc. No one's listening to me. So what does one do when no one's listening? You take to social media. And so I posted, if anybody has my blood type, I'm going to need it. Not that I believe that anyone could donate blood, but I thought that maybe somebody out there would have heard something different than how I normally acted, and said, hey, what's going on? I had a cousin that had this kind of foreboding, and this is what it was. So right, everybody was like, Stephanie's crazy. We're going to just quiet down. We're not going to engage. And nobody did. I went to at one point I went into Starbucks and I said, this woman was actually pregnant, and she's like, oh, how's the pregnancy going? And I'm like, I'm going to die. And I was so matter of fact because I was so tired of saying the exact same thing over and over again that people were just like, okay, I'm just going to avoid her until after she delivers, and then we can go back to our regular schedule program. So, I'm supposed to deliver at 37 weeks, 36 weeks to the day. My husband has to go to New York. And that morning he's in a big meeting, and I start bleeding over the kitchen floor. And I know that today's the day that I'm going to give birth. And so I call him. He's rushing to the airport. I'm getting to the hospital. The doctors are like, I think we need to go now. You've been stressed during this pregnancy, so things are quiet in the OR. Let's just get you settled and take care of Jacob. And so they give me the epidural. I'm Skype chatting with my husband to explain to him, they're going to take the baby now. And he's like, okay, where do I meet you? And he's still not getting it. I'm trying to say, please just know that you are the most important person in my life. And please don't blame this child, and please love them with your whole heart. And I was fully knowing that these were the last words he was going to read. And he just ignored all of that. He's like, where do I meet you? I said, 8th floor recovery, hopefully. And then I shut down. And then I kissed my daughter a million times, and I was convinced it was the last time I was going to see her. And then they put me on the gurney. They took me to the OR. And as I'm being wheeled down to the OR, I tell my doctor, Dr. Julie Levitt, I'm like, there is something wrong. You need to put me under general anesthesia. And she said, Stephanie, if I put you to sleep, I put the baby to sleep. I know you've been stressed. I will be your husband through this process. Let's just get this done. And I was done. It was my last ditch effort. There was, just to backtrack for 1 minute, there was one last consultation that I had done prior to going into labor, which was my doctor, Dr. Levitt said, if you're still having the visions, why? Oh, and I wrote goodbye letters. I sent out goodbye letters. It was a whole thing. And then she's like, if you're still having the visions, why don't you have a consultation with anesthesia? And I said, okay. So I had a consultation, a phone call with Dr. Grace Lim. She was a fellow at the time. And she on the call said, we prepare for emergencies, you'll get the epidural here, you'll recover here. And I said, I know all that. What happens in the event of this, 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 and this? And I, again, pleaded with her. And she said, Miss Arnold, we're in a teaching hospital. We prepare for emergencies. I hope I calmed you. I hope I helped you. And the last thing she told me that I said to her was, it is what it is. And so here I am being wheeled down to the OR, and my doctor is saying, I'll take good care of you. And again, I'm not being heard, but I have an epidural in me. This baby is coming out no matter what. And it's a feeling so fearful that I'm being wheeled into the room that is going to give life to my son and take mine. And I am feeling this fear in every cell of my body. And so you get wheeled into the operating room, you're having a C-section, which is a curtain in front of your face, your arm is in a T, it's freezing cold, aside from the fear in my body, which is making me shake. They told me that I was catatonic when they were asking me a ton of questions. And I feel like prior to giving birth that I scared myself out of my body, because I don't remember any of it. And so they tell me that they delivered Jacob happy, healthy, and seconds later, I was dead. In the moment that I flatlined, unfortunately, Craig is familiar with what I had, and it's an amniotic fluid embolism, which is an extremely rare pregnancy complication. It's a 1 in 40,000 risk where amniotic cells get into the mother's bloodstream. And if you happen to be allergic to it, your body goes into anaphylactic shock. And in most cases, you don't make it. The Northwestern delivers 12,000 babies, just so you get a perspective, 12,000 babies a year. At the time of my AFE, it was 2013. They had been in existence for 30 years. They had 10 AFEs in their history, catastrophic ones. 6 did not make it, and the other 3 were in permanent vegetative states. I was the first catastrophic AFE to survive a full-blown attack and be here speaking about it. There was So an amniotic fluid embolism is unpreventable. It is unpredictable, and it is usually fatal. But the interesting thing is I did predict it. There were lots of things that were happening in my body prior to it happening, that I warned everybody. And so the first phase of an AFE is cardiac arrest. So I flatlined for 37 seconds and I was resuscitated very quickly, intubated, and then 40% survive that. And then the next phase is DIC, which is your body's inability to clot blood. So your body bleeds out. And again, I'm O negative. And in a typical C-section, they'll probably have about 6 units of blood defrosted, ready for a C-section and for any loss of blood. And I was given 60 units of blood and blood product to save my life. But the one thing that I was curious about is that the OR was prepared. The one thing that they had a crash cart and extra blood on hand ready. And what I learned later was that very last phone call I made to that anesthesiologist, she said it didn't sit right with her. She said it was the first time she had a patient speak so clearly about what was going to happen, had a baby before, had a C-section before, and had sought out specialists to save her life. And with that one phone call, unbeknownst to me, she flagged my file and incorporated extra blood in a crash cart. And that's why I'm alive today. Well, and also because I spoke up. So here I am now, they stopped the blood and they put me into the surgical ICU, and I'm on life support and in medically induced coma. And my husband arrives. And for some reason, he said it was just data he was giving, but I think something else was driving him, but you get it out of him because he's not admitting it to me. He said, when the anesthesiologist sat in the consultation room and explained what an AFE is, and do yourself a favor, don't look it up, which of course everybody will, don't look it up. He said, if she needs a hysterectomy, this is the doctor we met with prior, a couple months ago. And she took note of it. She thought it was interesting. She said, look, she's not in a position to have another procedure, but we feel that we've stopped the bleeding. And 7 hours later, the bells and whistles go off and I'm still hemorrhaging, and they call in the gynec to do the hysterectomy. And the pathology on the uterus showed that a necreta had started to form. But when they took the MRI and where it was undetectable. So all of these things ended up being true. And the only thing I didn't have was the name of an AFE, but everything else had come to fruition. So just I'll show you, I'll share my screen just because there's a couple of things I wanted to show, because we're all visual people. Let me do this. Sorry, hold on a second. I will come back to it. So here I am in a coma, and my husband is asking everybody, what can we do? How is she going to survive? Let me get to the next slide. Okay, so this is that there. So how, what do we know? What's the prognosis? And everybody's look, it's an hour by hour, minute by minute thing. We don't know. We don't know if there's, she didn't lose oxygen to the brain, but we don't know if there's any neurological deficit. Her kidneys have failed. I'm speaking in third person, but yes, this was me. It's kind of hard to relate to that person or who I was, but it's still part of me as anyone who has experienced trauma. But on day 7, so we are Jewish and Jacob is a boy, and there's a circumcision that happens on day 8. And on the 8th day, or on the 7th day, I was still in a coma, and Jonathan's like, I don't know what to do. And he calls the rabbi, and the rabbi says, well, as long as the baby is healthy, you do the circumcision. And he's like, I want my wife to be there. I don't know. I don't want her not to be there. And he's like, I don't know what to do. And the rabbi said, you pray. And he's like, I don't know if I have the strength to do that. And he said, you find it. And doctors and different denominations and different religions and all nurses. I was the highest acuity case in the maternity ward at that time. And so everybody knew of our case. And so they prayed. And then the day before the bris, the circumcision, I get extubated. And the first thing I see in my swollen body is, am I still pregnant? And my husband said in that moment, I knew you were going to be okay, because you knew where you were and you were cursing. And so there is something I learned later that anesthesiologists say, the way you go into anesthesia is the way you come out of it. And I was angry. I was very, very angry. So when I came out of my coma and I was working through some of the trauma, the biggest issue I had was, I think that nobody had answers for me about how I had these premonitions. People I would go to therapists, I would go to the doctors, because I was in the hospital for a month. I had residents from different departments, from hematology, nephrology, cardiology, like all the residents. And the case was well documented. How did you know? And I said, I don't know. Why don't you tell me? I'm in a teaching hospital. And they're like, well, foreboding happens prior to an embolus or a heart attack, but 3 months in advance and the detail you had, no, I'm sorry. And the one OB that I had, because there was a group of OBs in this division, she said, I think, I don't have a medical explanation for it. I think you need to go spiritual. And I was having a hard time with it, because for any of you who've had their near-death experience, and if it's anything similar to mine, when you go asystolic, so you get unplugged and you get zapped back in, all of a sudden you're on high voltage. And for the record, I have had intuitive moments as a kid, and they've always related to life and death, and they scared me. So I thought that I was willing them to happen, which is why I shut them down until it was my own foreboding. And when you get to that point where you get plugged back in, all of a sudden you are energized, but you are feeling empathically everybody and anybody's energy. You're feeling people around them. You're feeling spiritual links from ancestors. You are feeling pain. And, during this time, I felt extremely bad for my children, because I was not able to do play dates or go to birthday parties, because I would feel so much frenetic energy. And so I just wanted to hide. And everybody kept saying, you survived, you're okay, everything's fine. And I'm like, no, it's not, because what if I imagine I'm going to have a heart attack? Am I going to spontaneously combust? And so no one could put the pieces together. So I focused a lot on the medical side to at least ground me. So a lot of the pictures that you're seeing is, I spoke a lot at hospitals about listening to a patient's, to be your best advocate and listen to a patient's intuition. Whether you think that's a spiritual place or whether you think we're hardwired, it does not matter. We have this feeling, and sometimes you as the doctor, you as a clinician are wrong, and you can delay help and treatment, and that can cause death. And so learning to be your best advocate. So all of this was really great. And I was not focusing on any of the spiritual stuff, because I did not have answers for what preceded my NDA. And people asked, did you see the light? I was on a talk show once, and this is before the book came out, and the host asked, did you see the light? And I said, I don't know, man. They gave me a lot of drugs. And I thought, in that moment, it was a funny segment, but I told my husband, I said, I am not getting the answers I need from reading books or from going to traditional therapy. It is not giving me it's not giving me the ground that I need to walk upon. And if I am now rewired differently, then I need to think differently about how I got this information. And no one I've spoken to yet has had answers. So I said, if there's a way to find out, I want to find out. And Jonathan's smart, where he's like, I don't like the sound of it. And I said, well, I'm the type of person that's going to go through the fire to get out the other side. And maybe that's a male female kind of thing. My husband's like, suppress, repress, we move on. It's like, you're good, healthy, let's move on. I am not that way. So I decided, I had a friend of mine who said, do you know anything about regression therapy? And, I'd done Jungian therapy, and I'd done some other healing work and cranial sacral work, but so I said, well, what is it? And she said, well, it's using hypnotherapy to take you back into the moments of trauma. And, if you couldn't figure it out, I am slightly type A, and I don't know whether I can be hypnotized, but I was so exhausted in that search that I decided, okay, well, let me give it a shot. There must have been something in the voice of the regression therapist, because when I think back at it, she is a Cuban Jew, and so am I. And my grandmother, who was santera, she's a witch. She believed in extrasensory perceptions of things, and she had a definite sense of things. This woman sounded a lot like her. So here it was, I was doing my regression therapy on Skype, and I recorded that therapy. And in those recordings, I was able to go back to the operating room. And what she said was that you use hypnotherapy in a calm setting to take you back into those moments of trauma. This already happened to you, but maybe you'll be able to see it more clearly if you are there as an observer. And so we finally, after 30 hours of therapy, got back into the OR. And I'm going to show you just a very little clip of what happened next. Hopefully let me see. Okay. So she's on the right. This is, no, right. Let's see. If it doesn't go through, then, okay. Let me stop the share. Let me pull it up.
I explained to Stephanie it's going to happen.
Okay. And share it like that. Okay. So what you're about to see is the moment you don't want to be here, honey. You want, he happens to walk in sometimes when I'm talking, and it's like at this exact moment. So this is the moment she gets me into the OR. And the way that I'm explaining it is, I am seeing Stephanie on the operating table. I am the observer walking in. And then you're seeing Stephanie as the spirit. And I'm just going to show you a minute of it, because then I want to talk for a couple of minutes, and then I'll open it up for questions.
Very quickly, and I'm going to embrace you, and I'm going to hold on to you, and I'm not going to let go. My eyes rolled back. My chest was out and stopped breathing, and I had a seizure. And, and I heard them screaming because they said, they, they said, Steffi, Steffi, Steffi. And Nicole ran to the head of the bed. And she's turning blue. And the EKG machine went flat. And I was done. And
Okay, so this lasted a few minutes. I talked a lot about what I had seen in the moment of flatline, that my grandmother, the Santera, was there. My favorite uncle who had passed was there, that I saw the EKG counting down, almost like slowing down in slow motion. And then I saw a shooting star, which was my spirit. So, when they ask if, I saw the light, I can't say that I saw it through my eyes. I saw it from an observer's position of my spirit perpendicular to my body. And I saw Dr. Grace Lim, who was the anesthesiologist who flagged my file. I saw her in the operating room, and she was standing next to the EKG, but she was there the whole time. And then I go in through this regression, and I talk about how what was happening with my doctor at my feet, the other anesthesiologist, what she was saying, who hit the button for the code, which nurse jumped up into my chest to give me CPR. And there were all these details, what my daughter was doing in the labor and delivery with the nanny, what my husband was wearing when he got off the plane, what, my sister days in, like, time and space, as you all know, in this specific group, stands still. So I couldn't tell you what was during the 37 seconds and what was during the 7-day coma. But there were all these details I had. And then when I came out of this, I had this relief, and my husband looked at it for 1 second, and he's like, one, I need you to stop this, but two, how do you know this isn't a recalled episode of Grey's Anatomy in your head? And I said, it's a fair point. After I was done calling a lot of names, of course, that was not my first reaction. So I said, it's a fair point. So I asked the therapist, I said, how do you know what I'm saying is real? And she said, well, sometimes the only validation we get is the patient feels better and you feel better. And I said, that's not good enough for me. I have witnesses. And so I had gone through, luckily I had it on video, and I took those tapes to the doctors who were present. Like, this is Grace Lim.
You were probably the most, I don't know if nervous is the right word, concerned, preoccupied, something like that. And I still haven't met somebody who was that.
So I went through doctor after doctor. This is Dr. Higgins. And she's head of OB anesthesia, and we don't have a lot.
I mean, honestly, part of me is a little bit skeptical, because, the scientific part of me says, you were under anesthesia. You had no blood pressure or circulation. How could you possibly remember this? So I guess, so part of me is a little freaked out about it, because it may call into question everything that we think about, medicine and what we think happens. And then part of me is kind of like, wow, I mean, it's pretty amazing.
And then this is Dr. Lim ultimately acknowledging, because I said, she kept saying, it's you know, it wasn't like an embolus that was normal. She's like, you were gagging and seizing. And I said, did it look anything like this? And
That activity that you did actually, where your chest is coming off the back of that couch that you're sitting on in that video, it's pretty much almost exactly what I saw.
so I was getting more answers to it. Now, there are questions that I know that this group will want that I can't prove, right? I wrote a book. My focus of writing that book was to open up the eyes to clinicians and to say, okay, we don't know everything. Dr. Jeff has, been a huge proponent of now the talking about like, shared death experiences, and other physicians are opening up more and more about their own experiences. My goal with speaking this truth was I am bridging this gap to try and prove to my husband this exists, and also to change the way clinicians practice medicine, and also to help patients advocate for or to involve themselves in their own narrative when it comes to medicine, especially if they feel something's wrong. And so that was where the book took me. And there are plenty of examples that I have. I kind of want to give you guys time to ask the questions that you want to ask. That's my story in a nutshell. Yes, I continue to have premonitions, just to kind of come full circle. There have been some really crazy stories that I've documented that I can talk about. We can go over a few minutes. I don't care. It's just, I want to give you guys an opportunity to ask more poignant questions, because I can talk and hear myself talk for like the next hour, and that would be kind of boring. So I'd rather answer what you guys want to know.
No.
All righty. Let's see, let's get the any Dave? Where's the microphone? Oh. Dave's praying, I guess. All righty. So. Yeah. Can you hear us over here?
I can hear you, but I'd love to see you. Can we turn on video? Because it's like a blank screen.
Hold it. If we show the video of the audience, we've got to get everybody's permission.
Oh, okay.
No problem.
You don't want to stop recording and then I can see everybody? All right, no, we won't do it.
Okay. No.
Okay, fine.
Martin's in charge. Anybody have a question? Yes. I could say where I was, couldn't I?
Hello, Stephanie. I still don't understand what you saw and what spiritual significance it was for you. You mentioned that you have a favorite uncle who had passed. What else did you see, and what spiritual significance did this have for you?
Thank you. So yes, I was born and raised Jewish. I had a very strong practice of Judaism. I went to Jewish day school. I believe in God, but there was a part in my life when I was very religious that I was like, I would feel things more Kabbalistically from a mystical place, that I was in search of what that was. I went to China and worked with Taoist priests. And then I went to Mexico and I was working with some shamans there just to understand spirituality from some cultures. And I've been on this like whirlwind tour that just to understand a little bit of it. I think what this did for me was when I came out of this and I started doing the regression stuff, things were opening up more where I wasn't looking at what was happening there as fact. I was looking at it like, did I imagine this? You can imagine when you create television and you create a story for TV, you're like, okay, that came up creatively in my mind. And then all of a sudden, because reality TV is called enhanced reality, now I'm living my own reality TV. And I was so conflicted because I'm like, no, this can't be true. This can't be real. I'm having these visions, but no, that's not real. But I was feeling them so strongly that I had to voice my opinion or had to talk up about it. And when I came out of it and it ended up being true, it turned my whole world inside out because it was no longer I could hide behind the possibility that this didn't exist, that there was a possibility that we've got one life to live and that's it. I was feeling and seeing things with my own eyes and my own body and my own psyche that I was trying to avoid. And so in doing the therapy, and going through the process, and it took years. So I don't know who asked the question, but it took years for me to ground myself enough to say I'm brave enough to talk openly about what this is. I think I was it was much easier to talk about what I could prove as fact, as real as evidence, as data, than to go deeper into the emotional and spiritual side beyond what I could prove. And so, how this changed me was when I have these visions now, or I continue to receive information, it's immediate. I know now how to filter it. I know how to compartmentalize it. I know, and nobody's perfect, but I also know that I don't distrust it or discount it. And does that mean that makes me a more religious person? No, it doesn't make me a more religious person. It just makes me know better than to question that the afterlife exists. I don't question it anymore. It's like, of course, when someone tells me their experience and they're crying and they've had their transformative experience, it's like I can validate that for them in any way, shape, or form because I believe it. I've experienced it. Whereas before, maybe I would have gone in with one foot or one toe. Now I'm all in.
Thank you for explaining me that, but I want to still know, what did you see?
Oh, okay. So one of the things I saw is I saw hundreds of spirits. So I went, the way I describe it is I was a couple of steps down from where all these hundreds of spirits were. It felt like a warm beach. I don't know whether that's because I grew up in South Florida and that's my version of heaven, but it was warm, it was inviting. There were hundreds of people there that had a glow about them. And when I saw my grandmother on my mother's side, she was wearing her yellow apron, and how I remember her in her 60s, cooking and energetic. And when I saw my uncle, he was the one that came up to me. And when you're talking, like it was a literal 2 steps. It was like, you're almost there, but you're not there. I didn't see any buildings. And I saw people I knew, and then I saw people I did not know. But there were several people that I did not know, but knew people that I knew in the earthly world. And so there was one little boy that was 7, and I knew instantly it was my best friend's brother, who I didn't know. He had passed 10 years before I even met her. And she had always questioned that it was foul play as to how he died. And the vision came in very clearly, and he said, you know, please tell my sister I miss how she twirls my hair. Like the word twirl. And it wasn't, what's interesting is that whenever I got any message, it was almost like I'd have to be Sherlock Holmes. It was like I had to understand the symbolism of it. For instance, I saw my husband's father, who I'd never met, but he was wearing a specific jacket, and some of you will get a kick out of this, but he was wearing a tweed jacket that had patches on his elbows, and it had a little green stripe on it, and it was beige and a little mustard color kind of thing. And he had a coin in his hand, and he kept flipping his coin, but he didn't say anything. And you know, when I came through, and I can't tell you that this happened exactly during the 37 seconds or during the coma, because it's all, you know, a jumble. But when I came through my regression therapy and all this, I got through my hypnotherapy. I said to my husband, I said, I saw your dad. And he said, I would tell him I said hi, right? You know, just very matter of fact. And I said, you know, he had this jacket on, this tweed jacket, and he's like, my dad didn't have a tweed jacket. And I was like, okay, forget all about the jacket. But he had this coin. It was a foreign coin, but it had, and it described it. It was a different metal, and it was different, you know, had different insignias on it. And, you know, what's with the coin? Because it was important. He kept twirling it in his hands. He's like, honey, I don't know what you're talking about. So then little by little, you know, I had to go to different family members, and his mother said, what's Jonathan talking about? Did it have these green stripes in it? It was like this mustard color. I said, yeah. He's like, that was his favorite jacket. So then I'm like, what are you talking about? That's his favorite jacket. He's like, well, if you would have said herringbone. And I'm like, and I'm like looking up herringbone in the name of a stitch and a tweet. I'm like, you're an right. So then, and then I go, brother, sister, everything like that. No one knows anything about the coin. The brother is sitting with me. How's your therapy going? And Jonathan, in passing, says, oh, well, she saw dad. And he's like, oh, really? Well, tell me about it. And I said, well, interesting. I said, you're the only one I haven't asked. I said, do you know anything about a coin? And he's like, it's interesting you should say that, because I was going through one of dad's old suitcases, and the crevice of the zipper, there was a coin. I said, can you describe that to me, please? And it was almost verbatim for the coin. So I looked at my husband. I'm like, I cursed at him. I walked away, came back, and I said, I know what the message is. This is the brother that was with the father in London when London had its one big snowstorm, and his father had a massive coronary and died. And this brother has always blamed himself for not being able to do more to save his life. And so he's kind of been in a standstill in his life for a long time. And I said, and this coin is from Croatia, and it represents a time at the last trip that he took with his son. And he wants him to focus on that as opposed to the moment that he died, because there was nothing he could have done for it. And, but it was like those kind of moments that were shown that I had to figure it out. And whenever I see a spirit, or whenever I meet somebody that a message comes through, it's like, I know instantly what the relationship is to that person, because I see it instantly, but I do not, like, there's something that'll be shown in a flash. And then I have to either figure out whether it's important for that person to know right now or not, because I'm not trying. I think in the beginning, I was just thinking that, oh, this is an interesting party trick, and this can't be real, or, you know, I can't, you know, I have to prove it that it's not real. And then each time something would happen, it would affect both of our lives. And then I finally got to the point where I just had to accept it and just lean in further. Until I did that, I was fighting it along the way for a long time. Did that answer your question?
Okay.
There's an online question. Would love to hear those stories of other premonitions. And at the end, when I stop the recording, I'll let you see the audience.
I didn't get all that, Greg. What?
Okay, this person just says, they'd love to hear your stories of premonitions. And then I said, if you want to see the audience, when you're done,
Okay,
we'll stop the recording and we'll let you see them.
perfect. That would be great.
How long did it take you before you started talking about your experience?
How long did it take? I started to talk about the intuition side relatively quickly, because I wanted to get as far away from the pain as possible. So I think by talking about it made me feel like I was telling a story and I was separated from it until it didn't work for me anymore. So I'd say 6 months postpartum, I was on TV talking about speaking up if you sense something is wrong. The near-death experience, I did not have a solid ground on which to speak. And so for me, I shied away a lot from it. Even when I spoke at IANS, I think I did a veridical panel, and I spoke about the experience the way I spoke a little bit about it tonight. But I didn't go into the depth from a spiritually transformative experience because I was still going through it. So I'd say, honestly, it's probably, I'm 11 years out, probably taken me 10 years to talk about it. And at some point, it's when it helps save someone else's life and there are experiences that I can no longer like shut up because it affected, and it could have seriously affected someone's life in a really bad way if I didn't speak up. I needed to really get a handle on it as much as I could. So I think like with anybody's spiritual practice, it's ongoing.
Would you describe the energy you see when you get this?
What?
The energy.
Yeah. What about the energy?
Describe the energy that when you receive these messages.
Thank you. So there was one experience. Okay, when I wrote the book, there was a woman who's a very big Hollywood producer. She does massive scripted shows, and she wanted to buy the rights. And I met her through a friend, and I'm sitting in her conference room with 10 people I've never met before, scripted, unscripted features. They're trying to decide what they're going to do with the story. And I am there. Now imagine, I don't know, imagine you're at the one person who's going to take your company for an IPO or take your story, take it into the stratosphere. So this is that woman in my world. And in the middle of the meeting, she says to me, Stephanie, your book is interesting. I liked it. I said, but I don't know what I believe, and I said, well, I'm not here to prove anything. I'm just here to tell you the story. And she said, well, it's not like I don't believe in intuition. It's just nothing like that has ever happened to me. And so we're in the conference room, and all of a sudden I feel a tightness on my chest. And I feel like I'm going to have a heart attack, but I know it's not mine. Now, any normal person would just shut up and not say anything in the middle of the meeting that's going to make or break your career. And that's not what happened. But it was more of an out-of-body experience. I'm getting this tightness on my chest, and my friend is like, are you okay? I said, I'm sorry. Somebody in here has a male family member who just had a heart attack. And I'm going through people, they're like, no, 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 no. This woman who's overweight says, you don't think I'm gonna have a heart attack? And I said no, but as soon as she started talking, it got stronger. So I knew it was somebody from her family. So I said, your mother is over your shoulder talking to you, screaming at you about a dress. No, my mother's okay, Stephanie, or is everything all right? I said, I don't know. I'm like, have you spoken to your family? Have you spoken to your dad? Have you spoken to, they're like, she's like, Stephanie, here's your valet ticket. Really nice to meet you. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. My friend is like, what is with the theatrics? But as soon as I walked out of the door, it released. And I said to my friend, I said, I have to go back and warn her. And she's like, no, this woman is not a woman's woman. She's like, she's going to throw you out. Oh, okay, fine. I go back to her office. I said, please, can you check in with your family? I know I blew the pitch. I know I'll never see you again. I said, but can you just check in with your family? She's like, okay, Stephanie, bye. Right. So I get a call 4 days later, and the CEO of her company calls me. He says, are you sitting down? And I said, yeah. He's like, first of all, this woman would like to apologize. Her mother passed 6 years ago, and she knew exactly the dress you're talking about, but she didn't know you had any of these abilities, and she didn't talk about any of this, and she's unfamiliar with this. She's like, but second of all, I said, okay, fine, whatever, apology accepted. And she said, second of all, when she got back from lunch, she got a call from her sister in New York. Her father had a heart attack at the moment you were feeling it. He's going to be okay. She's with him now. She don't ever want to talk about it again, and we're buying your rights. Right. So but now I'm in shock, right? Because I'm like, I could have easily not said anything. And here's a woman that can use her voice to affect an audience in however she tells a story. And because she's never experienced anything like this, and I had never experienced anything like this, like in that moment, if I have any gift, it was that I couldn't have a filter in that moment. And so because she had never experienced it, she witnessed it. And then going to all the networks with me, she was like, you all know I don't believe in this stuff, but this happened and I'm scared. I'm walking out of the meeting, but you guys need to talk, And so, and then in true Jonathan Arnold fashion, I'm shaking because what are the odds of this happening? Right. So I go to my husband and I said, okay, I tell him exactly what I told you. I said, can you believe this? He says, well, 2 million people have heart attacks a year, 1 in 37,000. Yep. Yeah. So he will never change, but he's like, he does get, I will tell you, he has changed in one way, which is like whenever he has a business meeting or something, he's like, Penny, can you come over and meet this person? Because I need to see if this person is a good person. How, like, what do you feel? Yeah.
My name is Sally, and I was raised Christian. I have studied Kabbalah and have studied many people's belief systems. I have a little bit of understanding. So with your upbringing, can you explain to those, here we're used to hearing these wonderful stories and experiences. And of course, we're in Utah, so I don't know, I'm not gonna ask for a show of hands how many are Christian based or LDS based or Jewish based. But what is the basic that is taught in Judaism about the afterlife, about living and dying, and what happens before, during, or after life on the planet? That might help us understand your reticence for believing this and explain to them the Jewish, more the Jewish teachings. Thank you.
It's an excellent question statement. I appreciate that. I don't know if I can answer all of it, but from my perspective, when I started writing this story, I called my rabbi. He was an Orthodox rabbi, and I said, does this go against Judaism? And he's like, no, on the contrary. He's like, we talk about life after death. We talk about Mashiach, which is the Messiah. When the Messiah comes, the dead will rise, peace on earth. But we also talk about the prophets and prophecies that are made by seers in the Bible. And when people have visions, just like people have premonitions and are intuitive, they are, I don't like to use the word prophets when I'm talking about like a human being, because I'm like, okay, I will never put myself in that kind of comparison, but there have been seers in the Bible throughout time. And so we absolutely believe that there is an afterlife. We absolutely, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was the big black hatter with the beard and the payas, and this was one story that I had for you. When I was 19, this was the famous rabbi in New York that people would stand in line for to get $1 from him, and he would bless it, and he would give you a prophecy. And basically he would say something, you'd have no idea whether it was something you were praying for or not, but it would just come out like he was channeling something. And when I was 19, and I start the book this way with two different examples, the Rebbe, I was producing Jewish educational documentaries at the time, and it really was where he grew up and where he was, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, is very it separated men and women, right? So women are not allowed in 770, which is where the men are studying. It's the women's job to raise the family. And so there are traditional roles, but the women also pray, but the women also go on this special day to get a prophet or to get a blessing. And because we were filming this educational documentary about him and his life, there were things about this man that were extraordinary. He will say himself that he is not the Messiah, yet, there were certain things that he learned and did and accomplished in his lifetime that most could not. And then there was no offspring. So people have given him the credit that he was the Messiah. I did not personally believe that, but I thought he was an extraordinary man who was very, very gifted. And so he gave me $1, and he said, you'll have difficulty having children. And meanwhile, I was 19 years old. I wasn't even thinking about having children. I was in my career, and throughout my entire experience, I could not discount that people could actually see things into the future. And it is against Judaism to go to a psychic or a fortune teller, because they don't want one to believe in something to change their destiny. But this is something different. And so there are prayers that are given to the dead. There are shivas, and then which are the 7 days during when someone dies, that you're praying for their soul, and you're praying for their soul to leave in peace. And then on their yard site, which is their annual, when you put the tombstone on the grave, that they have been blessed, and they are also there overseeing your family. So there is nothing against Judaism to believe that life doesn't continue after we die. We just when they give an example on Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. And I did not know this until I was doing more research. The Day of Atonement is after the 10 days of repentance. You have Rosh Hashanah, which is the new year. 10 days of repentance ends on Yom Kippur. And there is a moment in the in the service that they say if someone has a parent, mother or father who is deceased, then they need to stay and pray. But anyone else who has not lost a parent needs to leave the room. And I thought, my whole life, I thought that the reason is that it was community, right? You'd come together, you'd all be in the same place, supporting each other until the yard site is done. And the rabbi said, no, that's actually not true. The reason that they ask everybody to leave is that the power of that prayer with that community while they're asking or they're praying over their relatives is to bring their spirits in that room at that time. So every single congregant who is in doing Kol Nidre, which is, Kaddish, that is doing that specific prayer will feel their loved ones during that moment. So it is very, I don't know the word other than that you can actually feel the energy and feel spirit around you. And it is within the confines of the Jewish religion.
Other questions?
What?
Okay, the one question you didn't get a chance to answer was, they would love to hear stories of your other premonitions.
Another premonition. So I told you the one about the Hollywood producer. I had another one where we as a family were in. Wait, but are we gonna turn on so I can see you guys? This is like very like.
You've got to stop first.
You want this on the record and then I can see you guys?
Focus on the record.
Okay, fine. So Jacob was 2.5 at the time, and we went to a county fair in Northwest Illinois, and it was like, thousands of people at county fair, and we went with another family, and I had my stepdaughter who was 7 at the time. Adina was 4, or no, Valentina was a little older, 8. So I had all 3 of them there, Jonathan and myself, and then we had another family who had their 2 children. And we're at the picnic table, and the moms, me and the other mom, I'm like, oh, we'll go get the pizza. Why don't you guys stay here? And it's like, okay. And I walk away, and instantly I had a vision. And she knows me well enough where she's like, what was that? And I said, well, I had a vision that Jonathan would be doing this fishing game, with the magnets with our oldest. Our middle one would be crawling around the grass, acting like a cat. I said, and no one would be watching Jacob, and he'd be gone. And we turn around and everybody's at the picnic table. And she said, well, go tell him. I said, see, here's the problem. I said, we're just really out of the AFE. And if I go over and tell him this, everything's been so tense lately that he's going to say, go get the pizza. Dads parent differently than moms. Go get the pizza. So I said, I'll go do it. So we get the pizza. It's about 15 minutes later. We come back, and I'm about 100 feet away, and I don't see Jacob. And I get 50 feet away. I see Jonathan, I see Valentina, I see Adina, I see the other dad and his 2 children, and I don't see Jacob. And I scream, where's Jacob? And Jonathan looks around, he's like, oh my God. And we drop everything and go in different directions. And luckily, the police officer said, did you lose your son? And I said, yes. And so they brought us to Jacob, and he came out of the little trailer with some juice and some cookies. And so we got him back, and Jonathan's like, I don't know what happened. And I said, and so I told him, I said, how long has he been gone? And he's like, I don't know. And I said, I need to talk to you. So he gives Jacob to our friend and we walk away. And I said, I just need to know one thing. I said, were you doing a fishing game with Valentina while Adina was crawling around on the grass by your feet? And he said, how do you know that? And I walked away and I threw up. And I said, I don't know how much time I have. He said, you can't tell me how long he's been gone. I don't know when this happens. Like, how much time do I have? And he said, well, why don't we just take your visions as gospel? You know, he said, but don't take advantage of it. And I was like, okay. I'm like, if I don't get this, you know, if there's a tennis bracelet there, if I don't get that, so like something really bad is going to happen. But it was one of those moments where like I told you earlier, I no longer will just stay quiet because that could have been really, really bad. So when I have visions now, I say them really quickly. I said, look, it might be nothing. I said, but I think a drug deal is going wrong in the park. And I don't know if I have, because time is not my friend here. Like I didn't know Jacob would be gone 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I didn't know when my near death would happen or that I would come back, except that it would be the time that I gave birth. So when I have these experiences, I can't tell you that it's going to happen in the next hour. But what I do know is when I feel them, I now cushion them as to this might not be happening now, but I think we just need to be on alert that there could be something bad happening in the park. So let's just be aware of it. And then nothing happens. And so no harm, no foul. I had a woman that said to me at one event, she said, you know, I have this fear. I have 11 children and I have this fear that like, she's like, and everybody makes fun of me because I do countdowns every single day and I count the doors and I count the locks and I make sure, and I have this, and everybody's telling me to relax. She's like, but I have this vision that is constant that one of my children is going to go missing and it's going to be the time that I don't lock this door. And I said, so who cares? So then lock the door, do your count every single day. There's not, let everybody make fun of you. Everybody made fun of me. Everybody thought I was crazy. What in the off chance? Is it an off chance? Is it really an off chance? But in the off chance that you're right, it's not worth staying quiet if it's going to save someone's life.
Stephanie, thank you very much.